Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you again. I should tell Commissioner Hernandez, I recently had lunch with one of your friends and fans, Dario Fromer.
Great.
Yeah, Mr. Fromer, Assembly Member, the Honorable Mr. Fromer, now lives in Ventura. So it's a short hop from where I am, and it was really great to get together with him and talk about you, of course. We spent a lot of time talking about you and talking about things moving forward.
Great. And he told me I can get 2 houses in Ventura for the price of 1 in Burbank.
That's probably true. And I see that we've got Daniel Harris McCoy. Welcome, Daniel. It's a pleasure to have you joining us. I understand that at our next meeting, we'll have a little bit more time for you to introduce yourself and we get to know you a little better. So let's start our hearing on retail theft, Little Hoover Commission. This is part 3, Thursday, January 25, 2024. I'm Pedro Nava. I'm chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Again, thank you for joining us today. Let me introduce the other commissioners who are here. Joining us is Vice Chair Anthony Cannella, Commissioners Dion Aroner. I suspect Commissioner Byer will pop up soon enough. Commissioner Garcetti, Jose Atilio Hernandez, Commissioner Jason Johnson, and Janice Sidley. Good to see all of you again. There are legislative members of our commission. Depending on their schedule, they do attend, and if not, I understand that many of them have staff who follow the hearings. We have the commission staff with us, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster may be coming up, Analyst Ashley Hurley, Ellie Powell, and Shara McAllister, and Project Manager Crystal Beckham. And of course, the newest member of our staff, Dan Harris McCoy. Let's do some housekeeping before we turn to the subject at hand. We're joined by members of the public who are attending remotely. In accord with the new requirements of Bagley-Keene, we also have one physical location where staff is, where members of the public may attend, should they choose to, at 925 L Street in Sacramento. We will have a public comment session at the end of the hearing. Members of the public who joined us online will be muted during the hearing. Those who wish to make a comment will unmute you during the public comment session at the end of our presentations. If you want to make a public comment online, please use the raised hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Those of you who have joined us by phone, you can either dial #9 to raise your hand on Zoom or send an email to the Little Hoover Commission email address that oftentimes is posted on the screen. That way you let us know that you want to address the commission. You must provide the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so our staff knows who to unmute. If you're attending in person at 925 L Street, let us know, let staff know you want to make a public comment. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the hearing. As is usual at our hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The video and audio of our remote hearing witnesses will be turned on when it's their time to present. We are recording today's hearing, and after the hearing, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel. Now, as to the subject at hand. Last June, the Commission received a request from the legislature to look at issues surrounding retail theft. In response, we launched a study to consider this issue, and today is the 3rd hearing on the topic. Our previous hearings have included testimony from police officers, prosecutors, local government officials, and retailers. This hearing is a little different in that it'll help provide additional perspective on the issue and will feature testimony from academic experts, advocates, and another state commission charged with studying this issue. I want to thank Vice Chair Cannella for serving with me on this subcommittee and for his leadership on this topic. I want to make sure, because sometimes I forget, as to the witnesses, what you may find is that commissioners are going to interrupt you. Please take that as a compliment. You will find that the commissioners have read your written testimony. As I mentioned, this is our third hearing. And I suspect commissioners will be focused on very specific areas of your expertise and experience. So if you are testifying and in the course of your presentation, I say, excuse me, please accept that as a compliment, because that means I've seen from watching the commissioners that they do have a question or a comment they want to offer at that time. So now let me ask Project Manager Crystal Beckham, if you would be so kind as to introduce the first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are taking witnesses today out of order on the agenda commissioners may have received. Our first witness today is Magnus Lofstrom, who is Policy Director and Senior Fellow for the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome, Dr. Lofstrom. Please unmute yourself and start your video when you're ready to begin.
Thank you, Crystal. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. My name is Magnus Lofstrom, and I am Policy Director of Criminal Justice and Senior Fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. As many of you know, PPIC is an independent, nonpartisan policy research organization, and it does not take positions on legislation. My comments today on retail theft draws on PPIC's extensive research on crime in California, including the impact of criminal justice reforms. Next slide, please. So while certainly not without limitations, currently available data from the California Department of Justice can inform our policy discussions about retail theft. But in doing so, it's important not to limit analysis to retail theft, to shoplifting, a larceny in the crime data, especially here in California, given that under Proposition 47, shoplifting is defined as theft below $950, misdemeanors. Higher value retail theft that falls under second-degree burglary, which can be charged as either a felony or misdemeanors, can be captured in the crime data in the commercial burglary category. But as with any data, there are important caveats. First, the data currently available does not extend beyond December of 2022. Second, the data are limited to incidents that are reported to law enforcement agencies. Retail theft is likely underreported, and this may be especially true for low-value theft. Also, local law enforcement agencies may vary in how they report and categorize offenses. And lastly, but importantly, the data do not allow us to identify so-called smash and grabs or retail theft that is organized. So with these limitations in mind, here's what the data tells us. Next slide, please. So beginning with the statewide level, what I'm showing you here are the shoplifting and commercial burglary rate from 2010 through 2022. And shoplifting is in orange, commercial burglary in blue. And what we see here is that in spite of a 29% jump in 2022, shoplifting remains 8% below its pre-pandemic levels and 17% below the pre-Prop 47 2014 rate. But when we look at commercial burglaries, we've seen that it, on the other hand, has been ticking up in recent years. And the rate rose by 16% between 2019 and 2022, and is about 15% above the 2014 rate. But trends in retail theft have varied notably across the state. So next slide, please. So what I'm showing you here are shoplifting rates for the 15 largest counties in California, and then categorized by population size, smaller and rural counties. And what we see here is that for shoplifting, only 3 of the 15 largest counties saw increases from 2014 to 2022, and all of these are in the San Francisco Bay Area. It shows that San Mateo's shoplifting rate almost doubled. It's up by 95%, while San Francisco and Alameda also saw increases by 40% and 9%, respectively. But at the same time, many large counties have experienced notable decreases in reported shoplifting incidents. And we see that shoplifting has fallen by at least 20% in 6 of the largest counties between 2014 and 2022.
Mr. Lofstrom, before you move, and I'm glad I warned you of this. Commissioner Byer has his hand up.
Great.
Commissioner Byer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions or points. The first one deals with Proposition 47 and what I believe to be a incomplete understanding of Proposition 47. And this applies across multiple witnesses. So it's not just this witness, but as we've learned from previous hearings, the original change to increase the felony amount or threshold to $950 occurred, I believe, 6 years before Proposition 47. So I think we should try and avoid speaking in a overly broad way about Proposition 47. That's point 1. And point 2, for this particular witness, what I worry about in the focus on statistics that you yourself indicated are flawed sort of feels like a person who's sight challenged trying to describe an elephant, because we don't know what percentage of crimes have been reported. We don't have any linkage between data about theft and insurance claims. And we also don't know what potential charges could have been made under statutes beyond theft, such as organized retail theft, which is a felony, if 2 or 1 or more persons act in concert. So we're dealing with an incomplete data set. And so my question for the witness is, how do we avoid using that incomplete picture when forming policy recommendations that could have pretty dramatic effect on police departments, police resources, prosecutors, and ultimately the victims of crime and the perpetrators?
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate those 2 points in question. If you don't mind, regarding the data, at the end, I'm going to come back to point towards what I think are the kind of data that will truly help us move forward. I agree with you that there are certainly limitations, as I just stressed, when it comes to these data. They are definitely with limitations, and it certainly is regarding reporting is one of the factors. And regarding the threshold, you are correct that we did make changes to that. That happened in 2010, and I believe they were implemented as of January of 2011. That's when we bumped the felony threshold. My point here is the definition of shoplifting was part of Prop 47. So it didn't, I'm not indicating that it changed the threshold level, but shoplifting was defined as such as any retail theft incident when the theft is $950 or below, and that's a misdemeanor. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify that. Other questions?
No, I don't see any. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. So let's turn to the next slide, which is looking at commercial burglary. And here we see that they are more widespread, the increases. So here we see that commercial burglary rose in 10 of the state's largest counties between 2014 and 2022. Should point out, I should have pointed out in the previous slide, that the percentages that you see above each bar or set of 3 bars represents the change between 2014 and 2022. And so we see here, there are some notable increases in commercial burglary. We see an almost doubling in Orange County, 98%. And then we also see increases in Los Angeles and Santa Clara. They're notable by 62 and 61%. I think it's important here to point out that most of those increases that we see here in this figure, they actually took place in the last few years. So they're really between 2019 and 2022. They are not so notable right after 2014. So if we turn into the most recent years from 2019, we see that 14 counties actually saw increases between 2019 and 2022. We can also see that the increases in commercial burglary that we see are in urban counties, and commercial burglary fell in smaller and rural counties. Next slide, please. So we can also turn to the monthly crime numbers to get a sense of—
Could I interrupt for a minute, please?
Of course.
I had my hand up, but this is
Sorry.
Gil Setti. Before you leave commercial burglaries, would you inform us as to the definition that was used to determine that a burglary was a commercial burglary?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. The crime data separates out in the burglary category commercial burglaries and residential burglaries. So it's from that burglary crime category that we can identify commercial burglaries.
So anyone who breaks into any kind of a store, is that a commercial burglary? With the intent to steal.
With the intent to steal, if the value is greater than $950, then it can be charged as a second-degree burglary, and that would be captured in the commercial burglary category.
Okay, but you don't have to break in. You can enter the store with that same intent, correct? That's
correct.
That's a commercial burglary.
That's correct.
The issue is, how do you prove the intent if they're not walking out with the goods? But go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's a real challenge.
Thank you.
Other questions at this point? All right, so let's move on to the monthly crime numbers. And what I was saying here is that we can look at these. What I'm showing you here is going back all the way to 2018, but maybe in the last year, 2022, are particularly insightful and may actually offer some clues what we're going to see in the 2023 data. And again, I'm showing you these are statewide numbers, commercial burglary in blue and shoplifting in orange. And what we see is when we look at commercial burglaries for 2022, that they're holding relatively steady with a possible decrease by the end of 2022. So that's a bit encouraging. Shoplifting, on the other hand, what we see is that it has been increasing steadily from the late summer of 2021 to the end of 2022. And by the end of 2022, they were slightly above pre-pandemic numbers. I'm not showing you here, but if we look at these monthly numbers by urban counties, we see very similar patterns in, not surprisingly, in a number of those, including LA, Sacramento, San Mateo, and Riverside.
Yeah,
I'd like to interrupt you one more time.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about who is committing the shoplifting? Is there a change over the years in the person who is perhaps arrested, both in terms of age, their background, et cetera, that kind of information? Do we have any of that information?
We do not, Commissioner, and that is one of the points that I'm going to get to in the end. We actually do need to know that information. At this point, no, we do not.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sidley, before you start, Mr. Lofstrom. You're muted. Jana, you're muted.
Thank you. A quick point, just to build on what Commissioner Garcetti indicated. What would be very helpful, I think, is data that would show maybe a correlation between the crime and what's increasing in each county, and maybe an unemployment rate. Also, maybe looking at, what's the income level of those particular counties. I mean, you see the huge rise in San Mateo. I think that data, as we do this study, would be informative. So I just wanted to point that out. And also, I'd be interested in no bail and whether or not this emphasis on no bail has any impact on what we're seeing. And so far, nobody has actually, I haven't asked that and nobody's actually addressed that, but I do believe that that is also maybe a contributing factor here. So that's it. Thank you.
Before you start, Commissioner Canella, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Canella.
Oh, thank you. Can we put the slide 6 back up, please, for the question? Just the current slide. So it's interesting that, you know, again, the whole premise of, I think the original letter from the legislature was, has Prop 47 affected shoplifting? It looks like from your data so far, it hasn't necessarily affected shoplifting, but there has been an increase in commercial burglary, which is over 950. But it's interesting, in April 2020, it looks like shoplifting dropped by the same amount that commercial burglary went up. So have you dug into that at all? Is that, it seems like, you know, again, I think shoplifting is a problem. So, you know, I'm looking at it through my lens, but it's almost like people said, wait, we can get away with this. Why don't we just increase the amount that we're stealing? So is that, have you looked at that data and come to any conclusions?
It's a good question, and it's a good observation as well, Vice Chair. I think part of it is kind of recalling the highly unusual times we were dealing with around that time. This is when we had shelter-in-place orders, and you know, a number. It just basically uprooted our lives, and that certainly led to some changes that we have seen in the crime numbers as well. So when you're thinking about shoplifting dropping very notably around that time, it's maybe not surprising, partly depending on the number of stores that were open, but also the number of people who were actually out and about. We had shelter in place, and we were highly discouraged from entering stores unless needed. So all of those things are likely to contribute to the drop in shoplifting. So that's part of it. And at the same time, it is possible that with the absence of people out on the streets, that commercial establishments became a target for some theft as well. So have not had the opportunity to look at specifically what's driving those particular trends, but you're definitely seeing something that indicates an offset between those for a number of months there in the part of 2020.
Thank you. I think it's safe to proceed.
Okay, great, thanks. And I also want to point out, Commissioner Sidley, on the zero bail part, wanted to let you know that we are actually in the process of looking at zero bail as it was implemented in the state as well as across counties, whether it has any impact on rearrests. And that report we expect to release in the late summer at PPIC. So we are looking into that very important issue as well. Next slide, please. All right, so overall, what the crime data is indicating is that retailers have increasingly been targets of crime in some parts of California. Reported shoplifting incidents rose in the Bay Area, but also monthly crime data for 2022 shows that in some areas, shoplifting is trending up, LA and a few other urban areas. When we look at commercial burglary, we see more widespread increases. It's up in most large urban counties, but I think it's important to point out that those increases are primarily driven by what's happened in the last few years. Overall, since 2019, it's up in 21 counties in California since 2019, and that's home to 82% of the state's population. Next slide, please. All right, so turning now to Proposition 47. It has been and continues to be a central focus in discussions about property crime and retail theft. And in a 2018 report, we used crime data through 2016 only to examine whether the reform had any impacts on crime. And what I'm showing you here is an example of how we answer this question. In this case, it's larceny, but broadly what we're doing is we are using an approach that aims to identify a combination of states that best matches California's crime trend before we embarked on a number of criminal justice reforms. And then the comparison states that we can identify from the data, so this is using data for all states in the US, the comparison states trends in the years after the reform. It's done our best estimate of what California's crime trend would look like if we did not pass the reform. And if there are any deviations in California's crime trend from that of the comparison states, that's an indication of an impact of the reform. We did not find statistically significant evidence of Prop 47 affecting violent crime, but we did identify an increase in property crime specifically, and this is what we're seeing here. We estimated that larceny increased by about 9%. So let me explain this. What we're doing here is we're looking at a period from 2000 to 2011. That's the year when we passed the first major significant criminal justice reforms in a number of years in California. What the data is allowing us to do is actually identifying a number of states that presents this picture that is really similar to California before. And then we see with the passing of realignment, we see that larceny increased in the wake of realignment, but we see the same pattern in the comparison states. So there's no indication that realignment led to increases in larceny. Fast forward to Prop 47, now we are seeing a deviation in California's larceny rate. It is notably higher than it is in the comparison states, and over the years, we've seen that it's maintained that or possibly increased that gap. And in recent years, it's also above the US rate, something that we haven't seen for some time. I should point out, when we look at California data, it allows us to break down larceny further. We see that the increase that we experienced in California in the wake of Prop 47 was really driven by car break-ins. But we did find that shoplifting jumped initially after the implementation, stayed higher through 2015, but started to come back down in 2016, and it came back down to the levels of what we had observed before Prop 47. And of course, with the data, we cannot determine the extent to which the decrease that we saw in 2016 was driven by decreased reporting or an actual decrease in the number of shoplifting incidents. All right, last slide. All right, so from a data and researcher perspective, what is needed to effectively address retail theft? Well, it includes detailed data that would allow for determination of driving forces and differences across regions in retail theft. And here, what I'm thinking is that policy solutions need to be informed by an understanding of who is committing retail theft and under what circumstances. And for example, incidents that can be tied to organized retail theft call for different approaches and solutions than theft by offenders acting out of poverty and or substance abuse problems. We currently do not have data that speaks to that. That would be very helpful. Lastly, but importantly, responses to incidents of retail theft may also play a role in these retail theft trends. First, retailers may be less likely to report incidents if law enforcement responses are lacking. We don't have that information. So retailers have not provided us with information on the actual number of incidents that are occurring. But arguably more importantly, offenders may be more likely to commit retail theft if there's a low likelihood of apprehension and consequences. So to analyze and understand the significance of law enforcement responses, what we need data on are on factors like initial law enforcement responses to calls for services, whether an arrest and booking was made, and whether the case was referred to the district attorney's office, and whether and what charges were filed, as well as the final disposition of the case. There is the automated criminal history system, ACHS data, that are collected and kept by the California Department of Justice. It may partially fill some of these current data and research gaps, and certainly something worthwhile exploring for researchers.
Yep,
That's it.
Commissioner- Thank you, Commissioner Garcetti.
Thank you very much for taking the time. A very informative presentation and helpful. One thing that is included in your slides and that you reiterated in your oral comments is unintentionally a little misleading, because when cases are referred, quality of life cases, including petty theft, are referred, they're not just referred to the district attorney's office, they're referred to various prosecuting agencies in the particular county. If a city is a charter city, for example, that city can choose to prosecute those cases. And the bulk, the overwhelming number of cases, for example, in Los Angeles, are not quality of life cases are not prosecuted by the district attorney. They're prosecuted by the city attorney and the other city attorneys in the county of Los Angeles. I think it'd be helpful to make that clear. Thank you very much again. Appreciate your work.
Well taken. Appreciate those comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Hernandez.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, taking time and providing us with the information. I think that we concur in terms of the need for additional data. I think that's part of why we're doing 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 hearings. But a quick question on that is the process by which we collect the data. I mean, what we're finding is different counties, different geographical areas have different methods of collecting data. Do you have recommendations on the best process of collecting the data that we need?
I mean, that's another good point. I think what we would really like to have would be clarification from the law enforcement agencies that are reporting these numbers to the California Department of Justice in how they are classifying these various crimes to ensure that we have that understanding. I think there's some clarification needed from that. I think that another thing that is happening at this time is also introducing of a new crime reporting system, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. This is something that has been slowed down. It's happening in the last few years. Currently, roughly half of California's law enforcement agencies are reporting these NIBRs, we call them, the National Incident-Based Reporting System type of data to the FBI, but it's not all. But why I'm bringing that up is that it provides more details about the incidents themselves that might actually help shed some more light. And it might also provide some clarification or being more clear about what specific type of crime is being reported by the law enforcement agency. So it's more detailed information that is currently being collected.
Thank you, Commissioner Sidley, and then Vice Chair Cannella.
Yeah, I just have one quick follow-up question, and that is, sir, I don't know if you know, is anybody talking to criminal defense attorneys, the criminal defense bar? I mean, obviously all their clients are innocent, which is fine. And so when you would ask for blind information, but I think what would be interesting to ask them what they're learning. You know, you can go to the public defender's office. What are you seeing? You know, your client's innocent, but as a trend, they think that they can get away with this and therefore they're doing it. I just think it's an interesting question to ask, and it's the closest you can get to asking a defendant themselves, did you do it? And of course they're going to say no, but I think it's data that also could be very helpful to us. And so if anyone's looking at that, I just think it's an interesting question, and the criminal defense bar would probably have greater insight on this than many others. So more a comment, I think, than a question, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cannella.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I thought this was a great presentation. I really appreciate just the data that you've gathered. On your slide 8, you talked about larceny, and there was a pretty obvious increase after Prop 47. And you could call it larceny. What's larceny again? It's the theft of property. Is that shoplifting? Is that commercial burglary, or what is that exactly?
So Yeah, thank you for that question. Just to allow me to clarify. So larceny is capturing theft of property that is happening without any threat or use of force, basically. So larceny, the biggest category of larceny is actually car break-ins. Shoplifting is part of that. Pickpocketing is another one that's included in that category. Theft of car accessories is another category that's in larceny as well. Something that has been on the rise in the last few years. So those are examples of what's captured in that category.
Okay, and then did you say that the biggest increase was car break-ins? Is that the biggest jump from the graph?
So what is really primarily behind that jump is really, yes, it's car break-ins. That's the big jump that we see in the wake of Prop 47. So car break-ins is the main driving factor behind what we see in those data.
Okay, and was that, and I'm sorry if you don't know this, I'm just going to ask it anyway, but did that get defined as something in Prop 47? Was it a felony, and then after Prop 47 it was a misdemeanor, or is it was 950 and now, or 450, or now it's 950, or how did Prop 47 affect the punishment of car break-ins?
In terms of the definition, it did not affect that. We had, as was pointed out earlier, we had made changes to our felony threshold prior to Prop 47. So car break-ins, it's my understandings, they are not affected by Prop 47 directly.
Okay, so it wasn't redefined as a because I think at Prop 47, some crimes were redefined regardless of the monetary amount from a felony to a misdemeanor, but this wasn't one of them.
That's my understanding.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lofstrom. Pardon me. Appreciate the information that you brought us.
Thank you.
Go. Thank you. Crystal, if you could do the next witness, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Charis Kubrin, who is Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society at the University of California at Irvine. Welcome, Dr. Kubrin. Please unmute yourself and start your video when you are ready to begin.
Right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you at these hearings. My name is Charis Kubrin. I'm a professor in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society at UC Irvine. And among other topics, I research the impact of criminal justice policies on crime rates. So today I'm going to speak about criminal justice reform in California and its impact on crime. I will also speak about trends in retail theft and the role that reforms, particularly Prop 47, may or may not play in those trends. And finally, I will conclude with some recommendations regarding effective responses to retail theft in California. So for years, California State Prison was at a breaking point. At its apex in 2006, the population peaked at more than 170,000 incarcerated individuals, despite the fact that its prisons were designed to hold a maximum of roughly 80,000 individuals. And as you know, critics charged that California was incarcerating too many people for too long, and that its prisons were in violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. So starting in 2011, as the result of a court order, among other things, California implemented reforms, including AB 109 and Prop 47. My research on these reform measures finds that they had no impact on violent crime and only marginal impacts on property crime statewide. And in my written testimony, I discussed this research at length, but given time constraints today, we'll just focus very briefly on my Prop 47 study. So following a co-edited volume I published on AB 109 with Dr. Carol Saron, I undertook a study on Prop 47 with my then PhD student, Bradley Bartos. And our goal was to examine the impact of Prop 47 on crime in the year following its passage, so 2015. And like Dr. Lofstrom, for the analysis, we used a cutting-edge quasi-experimental method called synthetic control design, which allows us, as he mentioned, to construct a comparison unit that approximates California. And what we call this unit synthetic California, and we can compare crime in California in 2015 to crime in synthetic California to determine Prop 47's unique causal impact. And I spend a lot of time in the written testimony going through how we did that. I'll spare you here, but to the findings for homicide, rape, aggravated assault, robbery, and burglary, we found no evidence that the impact of Prop 47 was any different than 0. That is, Prop 47 we find had no effect on these offenses. For larceny and motor vehicle theft, Prop 47 did appear to have an impact. What we do, typical to this method, is run a series of what we call robustness checks. These are tests that are done in order to kind of interrogate the findings to make sure that they hold up under increased scrutiny. I explain that a lot in the written testimony. These tests revealed for us that the findings for both larceny and motor vehicle theft do not hold in the robustness checks. That means that overall, we found little evidence that Prop 47 caused crime to increase in California, both for violent or property crime. Let me speak a little bit about retail theft, current trends, and headlines. So retail theft is clearly a problem, not only for store owners that lose merchandise, but for Californians who feel less safe in the streets and in the stores. And so it's critical to understand its causes and consequences, and from that create sound policy. Sorry, I see a question up there.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Vice Chair Canella.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So you said that crime hasn't increased or been affected by Prop 47. Just a general question. Do you think crime has increased in California the last few years?
Okay, so right. The first comment I would not agree with. It's not that crime didn't increase or decrease. The study showed that we did, that Prop 47 was not responsible for any of those increases after the robustness checks, sort of technically speaking, was not responsible. We didn't have confidence that we could say Prop 47 was responsible for the upticks that we saw in larceny and motor
Okay, so
vehicle.
crime's increased, but you don't believe it's due to Prop 47?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Right. The study shows.
Commissioner Byer has his hand up.
Thank you for your work and its complexity. I have a maybe more general question about the distinction between different variables that go into an equation like the ones that you performed. So multivariate analysis, or basically a black box where there are a bunch of factors. And Commissioner Sidley raised some: no bail, economic circumstances, unemployment, etc. Plus, you've got statutory changes. And so people are trying to control all the other variables and try and figure out what exactly is going on. I'd like to focus a little bit of attention on a subcategory of theft that is organized retail theft, because I think there's a variable which we have not been discussing enough, which is the ubiquitous nature of online reselling. And so it is not uncommon today to see one or more persons acting in concert with another to steal something for potentially a third person. That third person then resells the product. And the examples range from catalytic converters and auto theft to specific items within specific retailers that might, to you and me, seem like ordinary household items. But this organized crime component seems to me like it would be more amenable to felony treatment and more likely to deter behavior if you increase the severity of punishment, as opposed to changes in the level of punishment for what I'll call ordinary shoplifting. And so in your research, have you looked at the subcomponent of organized retail theft and this other variable about the market for reselling?
Great questions, Commissioner. Thank you. Let me start with the last one first, which is that the study that we did was for crime data in 2015. So we were looking at Prop 47's immediate impact on crime.
So that's before before 47, after the statutory increase in the felony threshold, but before the codification of the definition of misdemeanor level
No,
theft.
it included that. But what it does not include, and partly, and this is a result of how we collect the data and how we classify the data, is it really can't say, that study cannot say anything about organized retail theft as we are talking about it in current times today, in part because that's a designation, not really a data collection entity. That's one of the recommendations I have, is that we need to start collecting systematic data on that particular type of retail crime, because it's obviously becoming a problem, but also before that, it was a designation, it's a designation. And so largely we've been relying on the retail industry to provide us information on organized retail theft. It's not done in a systematic way, and we can't really say much about the impact of anything on that at the moment, given how we're collecting the data.
So misleading data from the National Retail Federation, for example, is problematic because it ends up painting a misleading picture. And so we know less about it as a result of that misleading data than we might have if we'd gotten accurate data.
That can happen, of course. One other point I want to make, which goes back to your earlier point about the method. A really neat feature of the synthetic control method is that by definition and the way in which it is done, it controls for a lot of the confounding factors that you're describing that are co-occurring with whatever policy you're interested in studying. So in our case, we were interested in Prop 47's specific effects. And the method, and I'm happy to go into this in detail if you want, the paper has information on this as well, but the method by its virtue sort of controls for these factors in order to isolate out the policy or the factor or force that you're interested in to determine its impact on crime.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions at the moment. If you go ahead and proceed.
Great. So moving to retail theft now, a concern I have is that current discussions about retail theft are overly simplistic and often not informed by data. And retail theft is frequently misrepresented in the media. So extreme but rare smash and grab events receive outside scrutiny in the headlines. And the news endlessly loops videos of these crimes while reporting, contributing to stories that go viral on social media. And there is a diffusion effect around this type of practice. So as a result, when it comes to retail theft, I do think there are some false narratives circulating, such as that retail theft is at epidemic levels and criminal justice reforms are responsible for this epidemic. But we cannot have a productive discussion about retail theft, its causes and consequences, without examining the data and attending to nuance, such as recognizing that retail theft takes many forms. And I think Dr. Lofstrom's presentation showed that. We can differentiate between shoplifting, which we know involves theft or intent to steal property valued at less than $950. This is a misdemeanor that falls under a category of larceny, which is a property crime. But we have to differentiate that from commercial burglary, which is amounts valued over $950 that can be either a misdemeanor or a felony. Commercial robbery, which often involves force being threatened or used, that's a robbery, which is a violent crime. And then, of course, is the organized retail theft, which involves the criminal rings that steal property with the intent to sell. And these are very different in nature from shoplifting. So the reason this nuance is important, and we cannot just talk about retail theft as one thing, is because we saw just in the last presentation that trends in retail theft show differences across these different subtypes. And in my report, in my written testimony, I refer to a Public Policy Institute of California report, which examined 2022 crime data that we just saw there a second ago. We saw shoplifting had seen some increases, but only recently, and despite this recent jump, rates remained lower than at any point in the decade before the pandemic. You don't hear that often in the news media. Commercial burglary rate, as we know in California, on the other hand, reached its highest level in 2022 since 2008. Commercial robbery rate, we've seen some increases, but we also know from the data that it is relatively rare compared to these other forms of retail theft. And then, as I mentioned earlier, organized retail theft, it's an investigative determination rather than a reported offense type. So we simply do not have systematic data on that in California.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Cannell.
Thank you. So you said that shoplifting has gone down. It's not going up based on the data. Is it possible that your data is skewed because they're just stores are not reporting? Because we've had in previous hearings, that's what the retailers have said. It's like, look, we don't even call anymore because the police won't show up. And the police say, we don't arrest anymore because the DA is not going to do anything. And there's this circular kind of firing squad. But is that possible that, because I guess I haven't done the analysis that you have done by any means, but I see, right? I see things. I go to the store and I see things locked up, but I see people stealing and I'm 54 and I've never seen that stuff in my life. So just anecdotally, it seems like things are getting worse. But so is it possible that they're just underreporting?
So thank you, Vice Chair. Let me clarify. It's not that shoplifting isn't increasing, it is.
Okay.
So in the report, I indicate that it's, and I'm relying on the PPIC. So these aren't data that I collected myself. This is data collected by PPIC, or sorry, that were aggregated by PPIC and reported. So it did increase in 2022, according to that report. But if you look over a slightly longer time frame, I think it's important, you know, a question I always say to myself is compared to what? So compared to the last year, shoplifting is up. But compared to years prior to that, it's actually still at pretty low levels, including back to, you know, 2014 when Prop 47 was passed.
But it's possible because there's very much underreporting, right? That's
right.
why
So unreporting is an issue, as Dr. Lofstrom mentioned. I would never deny that. There's no question about that. Ask any criminologist, you know, about underreporting and crime, and we will tell you that it's an issue. One good thing about underreporting is that it's constant. And so in other words, underreporting is a perennial issue. That means that when we do overtime analysis looking at crime, in some ways it's a constant, if you will. In other words, underreporting is always been a problem, particularly in larceny and shoplifting and the crimes that we're talking about today. Shoplifting has been, underreporting has been a limitation for decades, not just recently. So that allows us a little more leeway to make comparisons over time without the underreporting being hugely problematic, because again, it is standard year after year after year.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just know for like my business, we've had to spend tens of thousands of dollars to put wrought iron, do all these things because of all the property crimes, and we never call the police. We never call the police because they won't come. And that's been a new phenomenon for us. That hasn't always been the case. So anyway, thank you very much.
I would really like to be able to know how the extent of underreporting or not reporting has changed over time. I think the perception is that we used to report everything and now we're reporting nothing. And I'm not quite sure that the alternative interpretation, we reported everything all the time and we're still reporting everything at equal levels all the time, is also true. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but unfortunately, we don't know.
Before you start, Commissioner Hernandez.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I was cheating too. I was just reading some of the material you sent over in terms of the background. And it seems that you're the key expert to answer one question I've had in my head throughout these hearings. My background, I helped pass Prop 47. I mean, I worked with the California Endowment. I know that the impact kind of certain policies had in Black and brown communities, no problem. I'm on the LA Chamber Board. So I have to agree that, I mean, there are small businesses that are hurting. I mean, there are, small stores, small liquor stores. And so it is an issue. But I think there's a narrative here that it's one or the other. Either we deal with retail theft or we deal with criminal justice. In your experience, I mean, can we pass policy? Can we address retail theft without derailing some of the advances in criminal justice?
Right. I personally believe, given the data and the studies that I and others have done, that policies like Prop 47 are not really the focus here. In other words, I do not believe that rolling back reforms like Prop 47 would make much of a difference at all, because I don't believe these are at the forefront of what is happening right now around trends in retail theft, in particular shoplifting. If Prop 47 was the cause of all of the problems in retail theft, we would have seen a very high spike in shoplifting in California steadily over the years as Prop 47 was passed, and we don't. According to Dr. Lofstrom, PPIC data, and others, we see only a very recent slight uptick in 2022, but levels that are much lower than they have been in years, including prior to the pandemic. So, and there's other, I haven't gotten to this part of my testimony yet, there's other reasons why I believe undoing Prop 47 is not the right move. Because again, the research doesn't suggest that that's where the action is. This is not to say that we don't want to be concerned about crime, we don't have a crime issue with some of these subtypes, but again, I don't think Prop 47 is at the center of the problem.
So I think this commission is talking about lots of things. I mean, one thing we are addressing is the whole concept that certain measures put in place can deter this kind of behavior. And so that's why, I mean, beyond just Prop 47, I mean, do you think there's a general sentiment that there are more lax rules in place, and that's sending a message that is also related to the increase in retail theft?
Yeah. I think I have an easier time based on my research coming to conclusions about what is not behind the increases than being able to definitively say what is behind the increases. And that's always something that people do not love about criminologists. It's a lot easier to rule out explanations than it is to confirm what is happening and going on. So just to be completely honest and clear about what my research does say and doesn't say, what it doesn't say is what causes crime, in this case, these recent trends. But what I do feel confident saying about the findings of the research I've done is that Prop 47 is not responsible for upticks in crime that we saw after its passage. As far as I'm aware, I don't know of any study, and correct me if I'm wrong, that has examined the impact of these reforms in this present moment on these slight upticks in, say, shoplifting and that sort of thing. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. So in addition to variability across the subtypes of theft, retail theft, that I think are important to note, the PPIC report also acknowledges variability in these crime types by county across the state, a finding that is mirrored in national data on shoplifting. According to a report on shoplifting trends by the Council on Criminal Justice, which is another independent, nonpartisan organization, the dramatic rise in shoplifting, so often touted in media headlines, in fact appears to be limited only to a few cities rather than being national, according to their report. Tracking trends in 24 major cities throughout the first half of 2023, the Council of Criminal Justice find that in most of the country, retail theft, shoplifting specifically, was lower in 2023 than it was a few years ago. Of these 24 cities, 17 actually reported decreases in shoplifting, including San Francisco, although they did find that LA, another one of their cities that they studied, did see an increase. So another narrative making the rounds is that California's criminal justice reform measures like Prop 47 are the main drivers of retail theft. But as I just mentioned a second ago during the question, there's little reason to suspect that Prop 47 is at fault. First, Prop 47 was passed, as we mentioned, in 2014, and concerns about retail theft are relatively recent, in the last year or two. Why the lag? Much has transpired since Prop 47's enactment, including a pandemic, economic instability, political turmoil, and damaged police community relations, all of which are confounding factors. And this is why I often discourage against looking at a policy and then looking at what crime is doing and saying that one is the cause of the other, because you have lots of confounding factors, as was mentioned earlier. So it's important to do a proper policy evaluation that controls for the confounding factors. Second, the finding in PPIC's report on county level variability in retail theft suggests that this statewide reform, which applies to all California counties, is an unlikely driver. Rather, more local factors are likely at play. Third, if Prop 47 were to blame, we would expect to see increases in the crime of shoplifting specifically. And we don't, other than this very recent uptick in 2020, the last year. Instead, as noted earlier, we see increases in commercial burglary and commercial robbery in California, neither of which is particularly relevant to Prop 47, just given how it is defined. Fourth, other states' crime trends mirror California, but these states have not enacted Prop 47 style legislation, again suggesting other forces, factors, or policies are at play. And then finally, research findings on Prop 47 to date, including my own, generally do not support this conclusion. And nor does a recent study of recidivism or reoffending behavior published by Drs. Bird, Nguyen, and Gratte. They find that individuals in a Prop 47 drug possession intervention group had fewer rearrests and reconvictions for any crime compared with individuals in a non-Prop 47 control group following them a year after. Because of this, the National Institute of Justice's Crime Solutions, which helps practitioners and policymakers understand what programs and practices work in criminal justice, they gave Prop 47 an evidence rating of promising. I'll conclude with just a few recommendations, some of which overlap with what Dr. Lofstrom suggested. I see a question.
Oh, yes, Vice Chair. Thank you. You're better at this.
Yeah.
I
I'm
should take on the role. Yeah, no problem.
I wanted, you could have finished, but just briefly. So in the Dr. Lofstrom, in his presentation, he showed the larceny rates increase. Again, I don't know the X and Y axis, but it looked pretty substantial,
right,
for larceny after Prop 47, which, I mean, you're not just a data person, right? You make conclusions based on the reports you do. So what do you make of that? I mean, what do you think is going on for that big increase after Prop 47 to larceny?
Right. So our studies are similar in many respects. We use a lot of the same data, although his goes a year after mine. And we're using a similar methodology. But what we find is we initially see effects for larceny and motor vehicle theft. In other words, we also see that uptick. But when we subject that uptick, those findings for larceny and motor vehicle theft to additional testing to determine the robustness of the finding, like the confidence that we can have in that finding. Is it a true finding or could it be spurious? And it could be spurious for a number of reasons related to the study data, the methodology, the fact that the finding is not a strong or true finding. I spend a lot of time in my written testimony kind of going through this, but just to reiterate, when we subject those two findings to those robustness tests, they don't hold up. So what we can conclude there is we don't have a lot of confidence in the findings of Prop 47's impact on larceny and motor vehicle theft.
Okay, so you disagree with that slide then that he presented?
It's not so much that I disagree, it's that our results suggest that those findings may be spurious. You're using big
words, so you believe it's false then. I mean, you either agree with it or you don't. You're using words that confuse me. So
yeah, I apologize. I don't mean to confuse and I don't mean to evade. Really what it is here is statistics is like a language that allows you to talk in probabilities. So nothing is ever absolute. And so part of what is the challenge here in conveying the results is that because of the results of the test that we did, we can't say with certainty that the larceny and motor vehicle thefts as a result of Prop 47 are true and are real, because when we subject them to these tests, in some cases, they kind of go away, if you will. So what I like to say is we don't have strong confidence in those findings. Now, I don't recall off the top of my head in Dr. Lofstrom's research what their robustness checks found, how much confidence they have in those findings, you know, so on and so forth. So that's where the inability for me to say he's wrong, I'm right, or, you know, something like that is coming from. It's really not a meant to evade the question.
Yeah. But you think he's wrong. I mean, just to be
I would
clear, you
say
agree
our-
with that slide.
What
You
I
don't
would
agree with that.
say, to be quite fair, is that our studies reach slightly different conclusions.
All right, so before I go to Commissioner Sidley, followed by Commissioner Garcetti, I've spoken with Vice Chair Cannella a fair amount, and he ain't nowhere as simple as he'd like for you to pretend, okay? Commissioner Byer, but first let's do Commissioner Sidley, Garcetti, then Byer.
So a quick question, and I appreciate your study and the findings and your conclusions. I thought it was all very interesting. My question is that you primarily focused on the year after passage.
Correct.
So is there any doubt or where you would question your study as community members, criminal community, however you define it, learn more about this and the
Mhm.
changes, that then they become more free to commit a crime because of these changes, and your study doesn't pick up on that? Because when things are brand new, people maybe not know, and now all of a sudden it's spreading that there's new data out there which, you know, hey, I'm not going to get caught or whatever. So I'm curious of your thoughts about the lag time of the impact of this of Prop 47.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question, Commissioner. So one of the limitations of this study is that it's only going for the year after. So this is why we need multiple studies over many different years to continue to determine whether the findings we find are decaying or accruing, you know, that sort of thing. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of additional studies very recently that examined the Prop 47 or any other policy for that matter's impact on these very recent trends, in part because there's a lag between when the data become available, how long it takes to do the study. In my case, I believe the study needs to be double-blind, peer-reviewed, and published in a very good journal so that it is critiqued. So there's always that lag, which is very frustrating. I understand that. So of course, that's a plausible hypothesis that people have learned and they've shifted their behavior. I've heard stories by police officers when I've spoken with them that in fact folks are carrying around calculators and they know the $950 amount and they are plugging the value of what they're intending to steal into a calculator, right? So I hear a lot of that anecdotal evidence. The one response I have to that is we have a big literature on deterrence theory. And one of the things that literature shows is that, in fact, most people are woefully ignorant, and I put that, you know, in quotes. They don't know, and I would put that among, you know, criminologists as well, what all the penalties are, what the likelihood of how much time they would get in prison for a crime, how things would play out in the criminal justice system. Even with that information available, people are largely not necessarily informed about all of the details and ins and outs of the criminal justice system, how it works, and what penalties are afforded for what crimes. So I don't know. In this case, that'd be a great study. And I appreciated your comment in the previous one about a study from public defenders about what their clients are saying is behind their decision-making. We don't have that study as far as I'm aware, but I'm not sure that, in fact, everyone is as knowledgeable about what the penalties are, how they're changing over time as they are going and committing crime, even though it seems that would likely be the case.
Yeah, and I would find criminals out there with a calculator a bit dubious. Anecdotally a good story, but they're coming in and coming out pretty quick. I don't think they're standing there and ringing it up at the cash register and going, oh, I have $949, I'm good to go. I think it may come down to how do you charge? How do you prove? What amount of merchandise, things like that. But that's just my own theory.
Yeah,
been a
I
former
think
prosecutor,
I think far more
Mhm.
influential on people's behavior is seeing social media, the viral videos of what's happening and the way in which the media treats these crimes. So you have, the looping of the videos being streamed out across the news in social media, affecting people in places that would have never thought about a crime like this. There is a diffusion of this sort of thing on the media.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Commissioner Garcetti and then Commissioner Byer.
I'll hold off most of my questions since Commissioner Sidley just asked the question I was going to ask about the currency of this, the age of the study, but I have some other comments, but I'll wait until you finish your presentation.
Commissioner Byer.
Well, as much as I would love to discuss statistics and my favorite statistical concept, the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, which sounds like a bar drink. What I'd like to ask the witness about is the difference between correlation and causation and how frequently that mistake is made, and any examples from the criminal justice field where policymakers confused the two and produced a bad outcome.
Oh, that is a question that is near and dear to my heart. Thank you. Because I think it's a really important distinction that is not given enough attention. So as we know, correlation are when two things are related, but we don't necessarily know that one causes the other. Lots of things can be related, correlated, but they actually have nothing to do with each other. It happens by chance. And there's a really great, I forget the website that shows this, but I show this in some of my classes, random things that happen to be correlated. But in order for things to be shown as causal, one causes the other, there's a much more stringent set of things that have to happen. There has to be a reason that the two are related, a theory, for example, a hypothesis. One has to precede the other in time, and X has to come before Y. The precursor has to come before the outcome, right? And then a last thing you have to be able to do is rule out confounding factors that could account for both of them. And so we know, for example, a lot of things seem correlated at first, but when you control for something, all of a sudden that correlation goes away. I'll give a really simple example that has nothing to do with criminal justice, but I think is illustrative. We know that height is associated with intelligence. If you look at, if you measure people's height and then you measure their IQ scores or some standardized test, we see that the taller people are, the better they have. And, people say, oh, well, short people maybe have less self-confidence, they don't do as well on tests. You can come up with various theories about this. But what happens is when you control for age, what happens is the correlation between height and intelligence goes right away, right? Because the taller you are, typically in school, the older you are, which means you've acquired more intelligence, if you will, or skills to be able to do better on a test. So it would be important to control for age, a confounding factor. Otherwise, the correlation between height and intelligence is spurious, is what we say. So luckily, all of the studies that I'm reporting on in my research, and that others I'm sure that you are getting information from are reporting on, are doing statistical examinations that very much are dealing with causation rather than correlation, even as pure causation is always a challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My turn.
Let me just ask, we've got two more witnesses to go.
Yeah, I could wrap it up, or we could, my recommendations are in the written. We could move right to Q&A of folks.
Well, you've been experiencing Q&A in the course of your presentation. So if you would like to do a quick summary of your recommendations, only because the commissioners have them and they've read them, but with respect to the tape showing of this, as well as the 91 participants that are viewing this. So if you could go to your recommendations, and I apologize, but you've obviously generated a lot of interest by this commission, but if you could give us a summary of your recommendations, I'd appreciate it.
Will do. Thank you. So one of the things I point out in the written testimony is that when crime rises or even appears to rise, we often rush to harshen penalties, like creating longer sentences. But I emphasize that that can be, but is not always the right solution. And indeed, that thinking is what landed us in California before the Supreme Court in Brown v. Plata, due to decades of tough on crime policies like truth in sentencing, mandatory minimums, and 3 strikes and you're out. At low levels, incarceration does reduce crime, but at heightened levels, it can be problematic. It can reproduce inequality, and it doesn't give us the concomitant benefits, if you will. So my one major overarching point is that incarceration to a crime problem cannot be the only answer. I do think Governor Newsom's targeted and thoughtful response related to these kinds of responses to retail theft are useful, including expanding some criminal penalties and bolstering police and prosecutor tools to combat theft. So I think his recent proposal is a good one. But supplementing this, there should be more localized solutions. They are critical, such as identifying targeted solutions reflecting what the crime data suggests is happening in any one jurisdiction. Is it shoplifting? Is it commercial burglary? Is it commercial robbery? Is it organized retail theft? Is it something else? And I mentioned that funding to help local task forces that are comprised of diverse constituents can go a long way towards that. Of course, these recommendations depend on a clear understanding of the crime problem, which itself cannot be determined absent good data. So I want to echo the previous speakers' emphasis on the need for good data, particularly organized retail theft data. We need to have systematic data on organized retail theft, which I think is really the core of what the problem is here. And then finally, I do not suggest rolling back criminal justice reforms like Prop 47. Again, for the reasons I said, they don't seem to have a lot to do with current trends. And instead, I think any of the savings that we have from decarceration from these reforms, as Prop 47 intended, should be reinvested into prevention and finding smart programs and policies that are shown to be effective. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I do think that there had been a time in the past when, if you had a solar eclipse, you put somebody up on a rock slab and cut their heart out. That didn't necessarily solve the issue of the solar eclipse. But I appreciate your recommendations, and thank you very much for participating in our hearing.
Thank you.
I had the comment.
Yeah.
Don't forget. Number one, I'll try and make this quick. Number one, UCI should be very proud. They should be proud of you for the quality of your work, number one, and your ability to communicate. I sit on another foundation that only gives grants to academics. And and the rest of my staff is always trying to get the writers of the proposals for a grant to speak in English. Don't give me your jargon, because speak in English so you can communicate. You are a very effective communicator, both in terms of your writing and your presentation. So I compliment you on that.
Thank you.
The question I have, and this might be an unfair question, it may not be, but if someone, one of the people who is in your world of academic research, saw your study, how might they, or what have you heard, they would say, no, she's got it wrong here, or the study wasn't good enough, the methodology, et cetera. Can you address that for a second?
Absolutely. And that is such a great question. And thank you for the kind words. So studies are one piece of the puzzle. There's, as you know, based on all these hearings, there's so many different perspectives. I do believe studies are an important part of the perspective, in large part because what we see and experience as individuals or even communities is real and should be taken seriously, but is not the entirety of what is happening. And so what the studies allow us to do and is acknowledge that there are things happening on the ground, but also say at 30,000 feet, what does the overall landscape look like? And so the studies that I do and others have done, I think are great at providing the overview, but what they don't do, and that's why it's important to get this other information, is tell you in one location, in one locale for one point in time, what that individual or community is experiencing. Sometimes those things line up, and other times they don't. And so I don't believe one is right and one is wrong, but I do believe the studies provide a fuller, broader viewpoint of what's happening at play and are extremely important as part of figuring out what to do in response. So I never deny anybody their reality, but I also say your reality may not comport with what the state is experiencing as a whole or what the county is experiencing as a whole.
Great. One last quick question, underreporting. Do you know why businesses refrain from reporting? Is there, I mean, because if there's a law passed, you must report, or maybe you get some of them, maybe you don't. I am not an expert in this field at all in terms of merchandising and can they use it as excuse? Do they use an excuse to close the store, et cetera? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But do you have any information or knowledge about why large retail establishments underreport?
I do not. I would be throwing something out into the wind, and I don't like to do that.
Yeah.
So I apologize, but I'm not, there's probably a lot of different reasons, and I couldn't say what the main ones are.
Got it. No, it's a fair response. Expected it, but thank you. Well, I wanted to try.
Again, thank you very much. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our third witness today is Anthony DiMartino, who is Government Affairs Director for Californians for Safety and Justice. Welcome, Mr. DiMartino. Please unmute yourself and start your video when you are ready to begin.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning. It's still morning. Yes. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I know it's already been a robust and somewhat long conversation, so I will do my best to keep my remarks a little bit shorter than I think the written testimony that I submitted, but happy to jump into other pieces that may have been that I won't speak to directly in the testimony just to be cognizant of time. But my name is Anthony DiMartino. I'm the Government Affairs Director for Californians for Safety and Justice. We are a nonprofit organization that seeks to promote strategies to stop the cycle of crime, reduce reliance on incarceration, and build healthy communities. We organize California crime survivors and people living with old records here in the state of California. Reforms from the past 10 years, including Proposition 47 from 2014, have been critical in moving California away from its mass incarceration crisis. I think we all know that, and we've heard that today from both speakers before me. This crisis wasted billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars in the previous decades on ineffective incarceration that didn't make us actually any safer. The purpose of Prop 47 was to reduce the use of state imprisonment for low-level offenses, nonviolent, non-sexual, and to reallocate state prison budget savings towards local safety programs that would prioritize preventing crime and harm before they occur. We believe the measure has been overwhelmingly successful in communities that have embraced the logic and science embedded in the proposition and implemented the services and non-custodial remedies that are funded through the Prop 47 grant process, the savings. It is also important to understand that there has never been an investigative analysis of criminal behavior that supports the conclusion that the threat of more severe punishment reduces the likelihood of crime, including petty theft. You heard that from both individuals before as well. So the highest correlation is the likelihood of being caught, followed by swift punishment. These outcomes are rarely the reality in California, especially when you look at clearance rates for larceny. Prop 47 reclassified 6 low-level offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. Nothing was decriminalized or legalized. Criminal laws in California can be classified as infractions, as we know the lowest level, to misdemeanors, which can result in jail time, to the most serious classification of felonies. Misdemeanors are punishable by county jail time, probation, fines, community service, and a range of other options for holding people accountable. As you heard also earlier today, right, Prop 47 did not increase the misdemeanor felony loss threshold from 400 to 950. The action was codified in 2010. That bill was an effort to adjust the loss threshold that had been in place since 1982 for inflation. The 950 threshold is amongst the toughest in the nation, with many states, including Texas, maintaining a threshold of over $2,000. The measure, and this is a key piece that we are really trying to highlight here, especially in our discussion, that doesn't get talked enough about in Prop 47 is the savings piece, right? The measure also requires the state to annually calculate the prison cost savings generated and to reallocate that money to violence prevention, trauma recovery centers for victims, and 65% of the savings to the Board of State and Community Corrections, who provide grants to qualifying programs that range from mental health diversion programs to substance use disorder treatment, behavioral health treatment, reentry, homelessness, and more. The measure has helped reduce state imprisonment such that the prison's overcrowding crisis has abated and the state is no longer violating federal prison crowding mandates. Since the passage of Prop 47, over $720 million has been granted to programs that are effectively reducing recidivism, stopping crime cycles, and helping victims. Evaluations of many of these programs have found lower recidivism rates, higher employment rates, and lower rates of homelessness, among other positive safety impacts. The governor's budget this year projects savings to be around $88 million, which added with the 720 before, we're going to be looking at over $800 million in savings to the state and reinvested back into community solutions through Prop 47. This is all undebatable. And what else is undebatable is that retailers deserve safety, as do all Californians. What also shouldn't be up for debate is that we must use the full authority of existing law and invest in what works instead of being distracted by attempts to blame Prop 47 for the longstanding dysfunction throughout the criminal justice apparatus in California. Coordinated, thoughtful, informed reform throughout the system, as is clearly the intent of Prop 47, must not be unraveled. The retail theft issues that people are presently concerned about, from smash and grab to organized retail crime, are felony conduct. These crimes are not the purview of Prop 47, and the measure does not stand in the way of the justice system's ability to address them. What does stand in the way of the justice system's ability to effectively address these criminal incidents are bureaucratic priorities, internal policies, and long-standing operational practices throughout the criminal justice apparatus. Many of these practices and policies were implemented without sufficient coordination between the stakeholders, as each step in the process attempted to react to the implications of mass incarceration on their specific scope of responsibility. Some examples of these practices include booking restrictions imposed by the sheriff in response to overcrowding at most of the county jails in California. Very often, this includes prohibiting the booking of nonviolent misdemeanor arrestees or people arrested for a warrant alleging these charges into the jail. In response to this practice, field deployed officers were encouraged by policy and practice to routinely exercise the authorization codified as Section 853 of the Penal Code, commonly referred to as cite and release. Because most nonviolent crimes have not been a top priority of criminal justice stakeholders for decades, these citations are too often ignored by the individual and are not routinely pursued by law enforcement for prosecution. Call management policies that identify the response of field deployed officers to nonviolent theft-related calls often are the lowest priority. This results in many of these incidents not being responded to or investigated by local law enforcement. Case management policy statements that assign the lowest level of priority to the post-investigation of nonviolent theft-related cases, other than those rare incidents that result in an in-field arrest or are perpetrated by an identifiable suspect. This is one of the reasons that for decades, the case clearance rate for all theft-related larcenies, as reported to the FBI, has hovered around 10% of all reported cases. Also consider the fact that the definition of clearance simply means an individual was arrested and identified, not tried, convicted, and sentenced. 2022 FBI data documented this clearance rate at 7%. FBI data demonstrate that for decades, less than 5% of all larcenies resulted in an individual being identified, captured, convicted, and sentenced to a term of incarceration. This begs the question, how can it be that a result that has been shown for decades to be achieved less than 5% of the time can currently be the cornerstone outcome for achieving and maintaining public safety and criminal accountability in our communities? Law enforcement agencies simply do not prioritize sharing information with one another that would facilitate a quicker response and resolution to retail theft crimes. This is another example of the systemic failure of communication and coordination between our stakeholders. For example, failures to appear in case dispositions are not quickly entered into law enforcement data systems, and bench warrants are backlogged without any taking action in place. If police officers do not know the person in front of them has numerous prior failures to appear when they stop them or court-ordered warrants, but no action is taken, this is a shocking system breakdown. All these facts support the conclusion that continuing to prioritize public safety policies and resources that are simply reacting to crime is ineffective. Prop 47 and other reform efforts are intended to demonstrate that changing course from being emotionally reactionary to thoughtfully responsive is a far more effective and sustainable public safety agenda. However, effective programs are not funded to scale or provided with ongoing support. This continues to be the reality in virtually every community in the state, even though since 2012, billions of dollars specifically earmarked to address these needs have flowed into every county in the state via AB 109 and Prop 47. There are many examples of strong programs working to both stop repeat offending and redirect people towards stability. But too often these programs operate at the discretion of one justice official or one elected official, and the program withers away over time. Again, coordination, collaboration, and effectively linking the priorities and policies of the various stakeholders has been lacking. We believe it's time to fully utilize existing authority and law, abandon bureaucratic practices that fail to stop crime cycles, and replace them with practices that do work. Here's just a few examples of effective intervention suggestions for future efforts. Over the past several years, law enforcement agencies across the state, in many instances working hand in hand with CHP, have broken up organized theft rings and arrested those involved in them. We've seen it in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and in many other jurisdictions up and down the state. It can be done. And I'll just deviate really quickly. Just a few days ago, the Attorney General announced several arrests, breaking up a theft ring that I think he said around $650,000 were responsible for $650,000 of theft in the Bay Area. In addition, just this past fall in San Francisco, law enforcement began coordinating resources at the problem of car break-ins, using a combination of bait cars, plainclothes officers, and video surveillance. The result of more than 50% plunge in auto break-ins. In cities across California, we've seen crime rates decrease in 2023 as we get further out from the pandemic. We also recommend for further research and analysis the following. We believe improving criminal investigations by improving trust in the process and the outcomes it achieves for the victim, witnesses, and suspects. Civilian investigators to help address the low clearance rate. Community trust building and repair to identify barriers. Assess and address warrants and failures to appear. Support localities that are requiring action, sharing information, and problem solving across agencies. Improved misdemeanor courtroom practices, accelerated dockets, courtroom navigators, and then investing in smart safety programs to stop recidivism and improve life outcomes. We believe honest people working both inside and outside the justice system will readily admit that our criminal legal system is not functioning safely, and in that context, current crime problems cannot be blamed on reform. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Let me take a look at commissioners. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Byer has his hand up.
Yeah, well, thank you for your testimony and for your work. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. So we see in current political conversations, and I'm going to use San Francisco and the mayor's race as an example, where public officials, in this case the mayor, has proposed, for example, changes in the crimes for which police officers are permitted to engage in an active auto chase. An opposing candidate has proposed using ankle monitors to geofence drug dealers to prevent them from going back into the tenderloin. So those are either law enforcement tools or prevention tools. And I heard your recommendations, but I want to go to the non-incarcerative steps that don't involve either programs for potential offenders and avoiding them, but rather law enforcement and prosecution related cases. So particularly focusing on organized retail theft. Would you agree that if one or more persons act together to steal something for purposes of reselling it, that it should be a felony?
Thank you, Commissioner Byer. So, that is current law, right? I am not here to take a position directly on whether I agree or my organization agrees on, felonies versus misdemeanors. What we would say is, that is current law that passed and is, always being looked at to be improved depending on what we're seeing. And we believe that if that is what current law is, then law enforcement should look to prosecute under organized retail theft crimes.
Okay, so thank you for that. So you praised Attorney General Bonta and district attorneys in Los Angeles and San Francisco for using that tool. And I want to make sure that no one misunderstands your position. It's current law and you support the investigative steps that have been taken. So would you therefore also support attempts to increase the liability for the resellers of stolen property?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Byer again. I wouldn't categorize as what I'm saying as praising. I'm acknowledging that there are steps to be taken, that law enforcement has a role to play in the prosecution investigation of organized retail theft crimes, right? So I'm not necessarily saying I praise that. I'm saying that you are able to use existing law to get at these issues, right? That's what I'm trying to acknowledge there. Also, I would like to uplift and praise that there are non-carceral ways of dealing with many of these issues that we were talking about regarding retail theft, right? And what I was highlighting through the Prop 47 savings programs is that we have several programs, many of them that have been funded through the savings, to have shown effective results at dealing with issues of homelessness, right, substance abuse issues, unemployment, right, and reducing recidivism, right. So that's what I'm uplifting and praising, but I'm acknowledging also that there have been effective operations by law enforcement to address organized retail theft.
Okay, so would you support a measure that required people who filed for insurance claims for organized retail theft have to report them to the police in order to get better statistics about the nature and extent of criminal behavior?
Sorry, is the question supporting
in other words,
the data reporting, or?
Yeah, in other words, if you've got an insurance policy and somebody comes in and steals a substantial amount of money and you file a claim with the insurance company, shouldn't the person making the insurance claim have to file with the police so that we have a better picture of the nature of the thefts?
I apologize. I don't know the nuances as well in that particular incident, but I do believe that we do need better data around the situation to understand, what are we actually looking at?
Well, we've heard testimony, including from one of my fellow commissioners, about not reporting. And the question is, how do you incentivize reporting? One way is to require it as a condition of getting an insurance payment. Another would be create an incentive program that encourages retailers to report. I'm trying to focus on the getting a better handle about the nature and extent of the crime as opposed to proceeding by anecdote.
Right. I completely hear you. I don't think I have the expertise to speak directly to how we get at that data reporting, but I'm excited to see what you all come up with through your report on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Garcetti.
Hi, Mr. Martino, thank you very much. It's not really a question for you. It's really to address the commission as a whole. I'm not sure we're going to have another public hearing on retail theft. We might want to talk about the issue that really Commissioner Breyer and others have raised indirectly, and that is if you make something a felony, let's say it's a repeat petty theft person, and we've got them, and we get them on a felony. The question really is going to be, what is the sentence going to be? And that decision really doesn't make any difference. If a judge sends someone to prison, let's say give them a 1 year or a 16-month prison sentence on there, what will the sheriff do? If it's sentenced to 1 year in custody, what will the sheriff do? Is the sheriff going to release him or her immediately? The chances are it's going to be a minimal amount of time. Just raises a different issue that perhaps we've not discussed yet that might be of some import. Thank you very much for coming and testifying and for waiting for so long to come in live to us.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Sidley.
I just want to sort of finish the thought of Commissioner Garcetti. When you say that the sheriff, what's the sheriff's gonna do and let him out? The other issue that's right there is the overcrowding of the jails. Yep. A lot of times they're let out because you can't have them in jail. There's no space. So just to complete that thought for those that might not have understood the sheriff letting him out, often it's because of space and working through that. So just wanted to finish that thought. Thanks.
And Commissioner Sidley, if I may, just really quick, I think you also brought up the conversation around pretrial and bail, right? I may tee up the next speaker to maybe speak a little bit more to this if they're able to, but right, data shows most folks sitting in jails across the state are pretrial, right? And not actually sitting in jail because they've been convicted, right? So I think thoughtfully looking at pretrial reform, who is sitting in jails, could get at some of the issues that we're also seeing when it comes to, misdemeanor offenses being prosecuted.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Seeing none, I want to thank you, Mr. DiMartino, for taking the time to offer your testimony today. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, Crystal.
Our final witness today is Rick Owen, who is Senior Staff Counsel for the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code. Welcome, Mr. Owen. Please unmute yourself and start your video when you are ready to begin.
All right, good afternoon, commissioners, and thank you so much for having me to this excellent hearing. Again, my name is Rick Owen, and I'm a Senior Staff Counsel for the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code. Just a brief overview of the committee. The committee is a state entity created in 2020 to study and make recommendations to the legislature and governor about criminal law. Its goals are to improve public safety and equity while reducing unnecessary incarceration. I was invited to today's hearing to give an overview of existing laws relating to retail theft and to answer specific questions about how the law handles incidents of repeated theft. And before talking about the criminal laws related to retail theft, I want to start with a very brief overview of some data. It won't be too long here. I know that you've already seen a lot of it this morning. Next slide, please. So this chart shows some data collected by the California Department of Justice from 1985 to 2022 on the rate at which certain retail theft offenses are reported to law enforcement. And it gives a slightly longer overview than some of the data that you've seen this morning that's been in more recent years. And so we see here that the blue line is shoplifting, the orange line is commercial burglary, and the green line down at the bottom is commercial robbery. The rate is number of reports per 100,000 in California's population. And as you can see, our current rates for shoplifting, non-residential burglary, and commercial robbery are all at relatively low points in our history. So again, this just provides more historical context for where we are at a state in terms of our retail theft rates. While there may have been an uptick in recent years in some of these rates, we can see that these rates aren't anywhere close to where they were in prior times as recently as the 1980s and 90s. And that's especially important because it was during those times that we had harsher criminal penalties, including harsher penalties for repeat theft, like petty theft with a prior. When that law was in existence, our crime rates related to retail theft were actually higher. Next slide, please. This chart shows the value of property taken in reported thefts in California from 2010 to 2020. And the blue bar is thefts under $400, while the orange bar are thefts over $400. And this is important because many conversations about the impact of Prop 47 center around raising the theft threshold to $950. But what you can see is that well before the theft threshold was raised, that most thefts in California are actually less than half of that amount. Next slide, please. So moving on to an overview of existing law related to retail theft. This table shows some of the common criminal offenses associated with retail theft and their punishments. And what you can see is that current law allows significant penalties for retail theft, even in the most minor forms. Notably, except for the first offense, shoplifting, which is a misdemeanor, all of these offenses can be charged as felonies and have a penalty of up to 3 years in jail. Starting with the most minor offense, shoplifting, which is defined as taking less than $950 of property from a store during business hours. We see that even this offense carries up to 6 months in jail. The shoplifting offense was created by Prop 47 and also requires that if conduct meets the elements of shoplifting, it must be charged as shoplifting. But these other more serious offenses listed under the shoplifting line were not affected by Prop 47 at all. For example, if the value of theft is more than $950, a person can be charged with commercial burglary or grand theft, and that can carry a sentence of up to 3 years in jail. If 2 or more people work together to steal or sell the stolen goods, they can be charged with a felony, with organized retail theft or conspiracy, both which can be felonies and are also punishable by up to 3 years in jail. If a person smashes a window or display case, as you may have seen in a viral video, that offense is a vandalism. And if the damage is over $400, which it likely would be if you were to damage that type of property in a retail establishment, that's a felony offense, also punishable by up to 3 years in jail. And the most serious offense on this list, robbery, can be charged whenever any amount of force or fear is used during a theft, and even a very small amount of force, such as a push or even a verbal threat, can elevate a minor shoplifting offense into a serious felony. Many of the smash and grab videos that we see can and are properly charged as robbery. Robbery is a violent strike offense and carries up to 5 years in state prison. As we look at these penalties, it's also important to note the impact of California's 3 strikes law and consecutive sentences. Under the 3 strikes law, if a person has a prior strike, any felony sentence can be doubled, and they must serve the sentence in state prison. Additionally, with consecutive sentencing, each separate offense a person is convicted of can add time to their sentence. For example, even with the most minor form of retail theft here, shoplifting, if a person were to go to 3 different stores on the same day and commit 3 different thefts, the 6-month maximum sentence for each theft could be added for a total of an 18-month county jail sentence. Next slide, please. This commission has heard testimony about prosecutors' ability to add the value of property taken during multiple thefts together in order to reach the $950 threshold that's required for felony charging. It's important to note here that the law allowing prosecutors to aggregate values is one that is very well established. The California Supreme Court held in a case from 1961 that prosecutors were allowed to do this. It created the so-called Bailey Rule. By 1980, we see California appellate courts holding that this law is well settled in California. And while the aggregation law was already well settled, in 2022, the legislature passed AB 2356, which was implemented in 2023. And that bill added subdivision E to Penal Code Section 47. That's the Penal Code defining grand theft. So it took the prior case law that was already well settled, the case law from 1961, and now put it directly into the Penal Code. So if you open the Penal Code for the grand theft section, you'll see that thefts can be aggregated.
Mr. Owen, just a quick question. Does that cross across jurisdictions? Because many of the people have said, you know, I can't do it in a different jurisdiction than I'm responsible for. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, there was recent legislation that clarified that thefts can be aggregated across jurisdictions as well.
Terrific. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. I think I see another question.
Yeah, Commissioner Byer.
Yes, I want to focus on section 9. I think it's 940.4 that's in your chart. The organized retail theft crime.
Sure, 490.4.
490. Yeah. So we had a discussion about this with Sheriff Cooper, and he's law enforcement. I'm just a fallen away lawyer. I read the statute. I reread the statute, and it says one or more person acting in concert, and I'm putting in concert in question, in quotation marks. And we got into a difference of opinion about whether that was a conspiracy statute. And in the context of those words, in the case of rape, for example, it does not require a conspiracy. It requires 2 people engaged in parallel activity around a singular crime. So I'm wondering, is there case law under 940, whatever that statute is, that deals with the question of what are the elements of proof necessary to prove an organized retail theft? Is there case law?
Right. Thank you for your question. That law has existed for, I think, 5 years now, and there are no case laws specifically on that point in terms of what it means to act together in concert.
So what we've got then is we've got, if I remember correctly, an assistant district attorney or city attorney in Los Angeles saying, yes, we use that statute it's not a problem, and an assistant district attorney in Yolo County saying we can't use it because it's too hard.
Right.
So
Well,
is there something where amending the law to clarify what the term in concert means, much like the case you just answered for Commissioner Sidley, could be useful instead of waiting for the evolution of case law?
thank you for your question. I think that that term in concert there actually has its plain language meaning, and the statute itself is already written in a way that gives district attorneys tools to be able to prove it. If you look at that section, you'll see that there's a subdivision that lists the type of evidence that can be used to prove that somebody acted in concert with somebody else. And it gives district attorneys actually pretty wide latitude to prove it. So for example, in order to prove that somebody acted in concert with another, a district attorney can submit evidence that the person has engaged in prior thefts in which they acted together with another person. The district attorney can use evidence that the person entered a store with certain tools in order to commit a theft in order to prove that particular element. And the actual amount of and type of property that the person steals can also be used to prove that a person acted in concert. So if you look at the statute itself, it's already written in a way that gives specific examples and specific types of evidence for district attorneys to use to prove that element. And I think, the fact that in 5 years there's no case laws on that decision kind of points to the fact that it's not something that has been really in a lot of dispute. To your point about different district attorneys in different jurisdictions kind of having different interpretations of the law, I think criminal practice is very varied. It's a high volume practice. Different counties and jurisdictions are going to see different types of cases and laws come before them based on what's happening in their county. If the city attorney in LA area county understands this law and how to prove it, but maybe a district attorney in Yolo County is not as familiar, I would suggest that that's more so because of the cases that are coming before that particular attorney in that particular office. But if you look at the statute itself, it's actually pretty clear, not only about what in concert means, but also here are some very specific types of evidence that you can use in order to prove it.
Okay, so let me give you 3 quick fact patterns. A person goes into a store, steals something, and goes into a getaway car somebody else is driving. That's acting in concert.
I would absolutely believe so, and I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So second, we saw videos from the Retail Federation, a grocery store representative. 2 or more people are in a grocery store and they steal things together and depart together. They're acting in concert.
Absolutely.
Third, somebody fills a grocery cart to the brim and departs in a big hurry from the grocery store, not for personal use and likely for resale. Circumstantial evidence to prove the in concert violation. And lastly, evidence about the marketplace for resale of a particular kind of good, that is, whether it's jewelry or catalytic converters, could be evidence that the person's intent is for resale and that they are engaged with another person. It is not necessary to prove that there is an agreement and acts in furtherance of a conspiracy. Am I correct?
You are correct. And in fact, the statute also says that the district attorney doesn't even have to charge a co-participant. So in your scenarios, if they arrest one person and don't have the other person, it's written into the statute that they could still pursue this charge.
So going back through the video from the retailers, I submit an overwhelming majority of the cases they videotaped and showed us were felonies.
I would agree with that. And I would also say that in my review of the viral videos that I've seen, based on my experience as a public defender and as a senior counsel for this committee, those a large number of those are robberies because they're using force, they're using fear to run in all together as a group to overwhelm resistance. And so, I do think that a large number of those type of viral retail thefts could properly be charged as robberies, and they are charged as robberies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, you may continue.
Okay, I think I have a slide coming up. All right, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Turning to what the state can do to address recidivism. The Penal Code Committee recently explored ideas for reducing recidivism for people arrested for low-level offenses and found promising results in the law enforcement assisted diversion program. There are some people who are frequently arrested for low-level offenses, and those people are often dealing with underlying issues related to housing, mental health, or substance use. And with LEAD, instead of jail, police officers take these people directly to community-based service providers. It's a unique type of program because it doesn't remove law enforcement from the solution. It recognizes that law enforcement officers are the ones that are most often coming into contact with this group of people. And so it uses that connection to say, we're going to help facilitate, getting these people on a path to success. California implemented a LEAD pilot program in 2016 and provided funding to 2 cities, San Francisco and Los Angeles, to implement programs. And an independent evaluation by the BSCC found that each of these programs significantly reduced recidivism for LEAD participants. Since then, the funding for LEAD has ran out, and momentum for additional programs in cities that did not receive the initial funding may have stalled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in its 2023 annual report, the Penal Code Committee recommended expanding LEAD, expanding this program. And we think that expanding LEAD and similar type programs are an important step to reducing recidivism for low-level offenses, especially and including retail thefts. Thank you. I'm ready to take any questions.
Commissioner Garcetti, followed by Commissioner Sidley.
Thank you for coming, making your presentation. It was straightforward and easy to read and to comprehend. The one comment I have, LEAD focuses after the fact. That is, there's an arrest. Why isn't there anything being said or done about how do you prevent these? I mean, I don't know if you know this figure, but you can pass it on. Over 70% of all people in our prisons and jails throughout the country are school dropouts. So what are we doing to keep kids in school? I mean, that's where it begins. Why don't we focus on preventing the crime rather than just handling it after the fact? And that's, I know it's not in your purview or you're perhaps where you are right now, but it's one thing that's always bothered me, that we talk too much about after the fact. I want to try and help prevent crime, help prevent victimization of crime that often lasts a lifetime.
I appreciate that comment. I think that you're right. The state can certainly do more to prevent crime, and really the solutions are, I think, to your point, are often found outside of the criminal legal system. That, you know, better education, better housing, better employment opportunities do have a real impact on people's likelihood of committing crime. I will say, though, that for the LEAD program specifically, it can be a tool that is used not just when a person is arrested. And in fact, in Los Angeles, most of the LEAD referrals come not after an arrest, they come after the police officer is having a social contact with the person. So in other words, they see the person that, maybe they have arrested before, maybe they think they're going to arrest them in the future, and they reach out to them and say, hey, can I connect you with this program? And that's actually the majority of connections that with LEAD from that program.
Does LEAD a program include juveniles?
I don't know. The research that I've seen on it has only spoken about adults, but I don't see why it couldn't.
And it shouldn't.
Right.
In my opinion.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sidley, please.
So, Mr. Owen, you're clearly dealing with 2 former prosecutors when you hear from Mr. Garcetti and myself, or Commissioner Garcetti. And because I am going directly down the exact same line of education and whether or not LEAD requires it, good time off, you can do better if you go back. Many of these people can't read or can't do math. And so if it doesn't include education and an education component, maybe it should, to help reduce recidivism rates. And so it's really along the same lines of Commissioner Garcetti doing it before they get involved in lead. Once they're in lead, they should still be educated. So I just put that out there. I'm curious if it requires that, and if it doesn't, can we look at that?
I appreciate that comment, and I agree that a lot of people could benefit from education. LEAD is a program that really focuses on meeting people where they're at and meeting their specific needs. And so, you know, and it really takes the position that the person is in the best position to determine what they need. I agree education could be useful to a lot of people, but if they're unhoused, maybe that is not the primary thing that a lead counselor would be working on. So really, once the person is connected with the lead program and connected with a counselor, that counselor assists that person with the things that they assess, the counselor and the involved person assess are the most pressing needs. It may be drug addiction, it may be housing, it may be education, but it could be any number of things that are the most pressing issue to that individual at that time.
So what you're saying, though, is education is included. It just may be that first we have to get them off the street before we give them a school book of some sort.
I don't want to suggest that education is always included. I think, you know, education is a broad term. Drug addiction counseling is education, or, you know, so in that sense, you know, there's always an education component. In terms of academic education, I can't say that it's always, you know, something that is pursued.
Okay, I mean, some of the people I came across while we were prosecuting sadly couldn't read, couldn't do math. And
Right.
so when you think about that, and what are my options in terms of working, they're quite limited. And so to reduce recidivism, opportunity and the ability to work, find a job, to go on a different path seems to be not in their purview, because they can't do very basic things. And so to stop recidivism, other options often come from being able to read, write, do math, things like that. So again, not exactly what we're talking about today, but since you mentioned LEAD, I do think it's a tool that should be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Sibley, I just wanted to briefly respond to another point I heard you made earlier about the condition of our jails and really a discussion of jails generally. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, that you know, I've been kind of keeping track of the conversations that are being had around the state about jail penalties and whether there is a significant penalty or whether there isn't for various retail theft offenses. And I just want to note that, you know, for anybody who's been proximate to somebody who's been incarcerated, they know that any amount of jail time, whether it's a day, a week, and, you know, a couple of months, is a very significant penalty. It's, for most people, the worst time of their life. And the research also bears that out, that even a few days of jail is going to have long-lasting impacts on a person's mental, physical health, their housing, their employment opportunities, their parental rights, and so on. So when we talk about even misdemeanor penalties that are 6 months, and maybe the person serves, you know, 3 months, or maybe they serve a month for a misdemeanor, or maybe they serve 2 weeks, and during that conversation, oftentimes, obviously not directed at you, Commissioner Sidley, but that this idea that amount of time is somehow trivial, I couldn't disagree more. And I think the research bears that out. And then the other, to your point that I'm getting to earlier, is that, you know, why are people being released early? There's this idea that jails are at capacity, and I think that may be true for some specific jails in certain counties, but the BSCC provides data on the capacity of our jails in California, and right now, statewide jail capacity is about 70%. And, you know, there are places where capacity is much higher, but statewide, the capacity is at 70%. And PPIC just released a report this month showing that statewide jail capacity is down 66% from where it was 10 years ago because of the impacts of COVID and so on. So I just want, you know, the commissioners to be aware of that as well.
So, Mr. Owen, if I could, you know, former prosecutor doing misdemeanors in the city of Los Angeles, numerous times, if the person was held over for trial, we'd do the trial, they'd be convicted, and they would walk out an hour later. So, you know, it's not every time, but literally it would happen. Now, I agree with you that once COVID hit, because of the disease and how it spread, we opened the doors. And so, yeah, there's maybe more room now, but I'm speaking strictly from my personal experience in Los Angeles. And I'm sure that Commissioner Garcetti has some input on this as well, but people did almost no time. I mean, and I don't disagree with you. I wouldn't want to spend a minute in custody. And I do agree that, you then have a record and it's hard to get a job and it impacts everything. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I will tell you that, a 6-month sentence, people were not spending 3 months in jail. They were spending an hour. That was my personal experience. And so it was difficult. And then more importantly is whether or not somebody even shows up. If they're not held over, they're, bound over and not bound over for trial and they're released, well, then you get into the whether or not they show up at all for trial. And so that's a completely different topic. But yeah, jail's awful. And I'm not disputing that. But I do, from personal experience, have some questions about really how much time somebody is spending in Los Angeles for a misdemeanor, but thank you.
Vice Chair Cannella.
Yes, thank you, sir. First off, great presentation. You did a great job. Secondly, you referenced the study that shows the California jails are 70%. Could you please share that with our staff and they could hopefully give it to us? Because we've heard different things, that there's no capacity. They don't have room for these low-level offenders. So if you have something that shows differently, I'd love to see it. So thank you.
Sure. I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you. Let me take a look at any other questions or comments from commissioners. Not seeing any hands up. I think let me offer a thank you for your work on the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code. Obviously, that's a significant responsibility and appreciate your commitment to that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ethan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That concludes all of the witnesses. We can now go on to the public comment portion of our agenda. And I'll ask Ashley to put up, or Shara to put up, the instructions on the screen. For members of the public who wish to make public comment, please use the raised hand function in Zoom. If you have phoned into the meeting, please email us immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov.
Yeah, Ethan, I'm going to interrupt you. My apologies.
Yes.
It looks as though we got 2 commissioners who want to speak before public comment. I just saw Commissioner Garcetti's got a hand up and Commissioner Hernandez.
Yeah, the question I had, I don't know if the commission has ever done this, but I would ask us to consider the commission send a letter to every sheriff in the county asking what their jail capacity is, 1, and 2, what their capacity is on a given date. They can name the date.
Yeah, let's kick that to staff, because I've got a feeling as compared to us doing original research, there may be organizations and entities that have that responsibility.
Okay.
And Commissioner, I'm sorry, Gil, anything else?
No.
Okay,
That's
Commissioner Hernandez.
Just a process question. We have public comment, and then do we have another hearing on this, or what's the process on retail theft?
Turn over. I'll ask Ethan.
Commissioner Hernandez, if I may jump in there. That is really a question for the commission to decide. The plan right now is to use the February 8th meeting date, which has already been scheduled, for a business meeting. We need a business meeting to address several ongoing studies and topic selection and things like that. After that, the sort of tentative plan, as discussed with the subcommittee, which is the chairman and the vice chairman, was to move on to other topics and to proceed with an issue brief and then a report on retail theft, in part in recognition of the fact that the legislature is moving quickly on these issues and we need to get something out if it's going to be relevant. However, if the commission wishes us to hold an additional hearing, we could certainly schedule that. So that's really a discussion for all of you, and we have discussed it previously with the subcommittee and thought it best to try to move to a report as quickly as possible, but that's up to the commission entirely.
All right. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Hernandez? Okay, thank you. Back to you, Ethan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we may, then we will move on to public comment at this point. If members of the public wish to make public comment, they are limited to 3 minutes per commenter in keeping with the commission's traditional practice. And members of the public will be, the commission will be able to hear you but not see you. So I am in the public location that we noticed. I see that there is no one in the room indicating a desire to make public comment. I believe I will look at the computer now, and I believe no one has indicated a desire to make public comment by raising hands. Ashley, if I may ask you, have we received any emails requesting a desire to make public comment?
No, we have no emails.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman, at that point, then we have completed today's agenda. I don't know if the commission wishes to discuss whether or not we want to have additional hearings or the commission wishes to defer that to the subcommittee. That's entirely up to you. But we've completed the agenda. The next scheduled hearing is February 8th, and we do need to have a business meeting at that meeting.
Yeah, let's, I think, why don't we take up the question that was raised by Commissioner Hernandez, since we're all here, and we can have a conversation and still conclude by 12:30. So I think what Ethan indicated, and we had a discussion, and I'll get to you in just a second, Dion, I do see your hand, is you've got a select committee on retail theft. You've got the new chair in the Assembly Public Safety, who has already said that they intend to introduce legislation on retail theft. You've got the governor's initiative that was set out a couple of weeks back on focusing on retail theft, but in particular the more high-end kind of organized burglary, well, actually the retail theft. And we felt that if we don't get an issue brief out, by the time we finish the report, it'll be too late. And so that needs to factor in what we're talking about. But let me go to Commissioner Aroner.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sitting here, just so you should know, I'm sitting here looking at my backyard, and in the next backyard, I'm watching the deer going and eating. Right, this is Berkeley, everybody. This is not in the Sierras. Anyway, so we've now had 3 hearings, right, on this topic, and I don't think that the information that we're going to garner from another hearing or from whatever is going to get us any more indication of what the problems are, starting with the lack of data. Which seems to be kind of the basis for what everybody says, is that data is a real problem. It's been a problem collecting it for a variety of reasons, okay? But if it's really hard to make recommendations when you don't have a data set that we can all rely on, because otherwise we're just literally doing things by stories. And the other thing, obviously, is the role of social media in all of this, right? Why is the legislature so interested in this? Why is everybody? Why is the public? Why are the newspapers? Everybody? Because it's a great story, except we still don't have any data to tell us, because social media, you can run the same thing how many thousands of times, right? And it multiplies by millions, and everybody thinks that things are out of control. And it's not clear that that is, because we don't know, because we don't have any data to tell us that it's out of control or that anything. So you just saw presentations today that show over a long period of time that things, numbers so far don't show that we are in an epidemic of this, except that when you look at television or the front pages of newspapers, you believe that there's an epidemic, and that seems to be driving the legislative interest, right? Having been a former legislator, I understand it completely, right, about legislating by anecdote, right? I'm sure I've been guilty of that myself over the years. But I just think at this point, as the chair has said, the legislature is moving forward. We need to tell them at least what we have found so far, which might be that you all need to do something about data collection and getting some standardized data collection going around the state, and getting police departments and stores. This issue of stores. We saw those the videos about stores things. Did any of them ever think of reporting those? Right, they took videos of them, but did anything ever come of that, because they had enough information to share with police and with the legal system? So from my perspective, we have enough to go on, right? Given the lack of data, we have enough to go on to say something to the legislature in a timely fashion, whether it be not a full report necessarily, as the chairman kind of is alluding to, that we need to get them something to say, here's what we've heard. And if we have any recommendations out of it, to provide them with that as soon as possible. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Commissioner Hernandez?
I similarly agree in terms of the timeline, and I would also defer to the subcommittee in terms of having a framework. But I do think that, I mean, if possible, Commissioner Garcetti has a great point, and that we should use the opportunity that while we're creating the framework and the report, maybe to solicit more information, if that is possible. But definitely like to see a framework and some recommendations soon.
Very good. Any further suggestions from commissioners? So not seeing any, it seems to me that what I hear us maybe agreeing to is that given the position of the legislature moving forward, that we should at least prepare an issue brief that summarizes some of the information that we've been able to gather, so that it provides some direction. And that to be done sooner rather than later, so that theoretically, I guess what you're saying, Ethan, is that we could look at that issue brief in February, or because it's already January 25, or is the thought that it needs to go out sooner?
Well, traditionally, Mr. Chairman, the issue brief format is not actually sent to the full commission. It is usually approved just by the subcommittee and worked out at staff, since there are no recommendations in issue briefs, just factual findings.
Okay.
So my recommendation would be that we take that issue brief to the subcommittee. We do not necessarily need to take that to the full commission, and we would take a draft report with recommendations, obviously, to the full commission as soon as possible. That would probably not be at the February meeting, to be honest, but probably at the March meeting. But the issue brief would come out sooner. And as we develop that issue brief, of course, we could, in response to Commissioner Hernandez comments, develop more into Commissioner Hernandez, Commissioner Garcetti's comments. We can certainly and would develop more information at the staff level on things like jail capacity, whether that's taking other reports that exist or surveying sheriffs. We can find that information.
Okay, and let me tell you, Commissioner Garcetti, what part of why I suggest that we look for organizations or reporting that is already in place is we don't have a way to compel the jails to tell us anything. And if we send out, 58 letters and we get back 14 responses, it kind of puts us in a bad spot, as compared to, I'm going to assume that the jails already have a responsibility to report capacity to somebody, and we may be able to get the information that way.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I think you might be right there. If we get a low response, if we were to get a low response, there would also be some focus on the sheriff for why they are not making this information public. So I don't always believe, frankly, when the sheriff says we're overcrowded. Maybe they were overcrowded one day, but today you're not overcrowded. Yeah. Anyway.
Commissioner Beyer.
Yeah, I completely support the chair and his proposal on the issue brief, and understand why it's possible to do that format. The only slight amendment might be to try to make sure that we share in a useful, accessible way at the staff level some of the learnings that we've uncovered in the context of the hearings. And let me be a little more specific. I think it's possible, based on the work done by staff in anticipation of the first hearing about the data problems and all the data problems we've heard since, to write an issue brief that is about data or data gaps. But I think we've learned some other things, and I'll point out one from today, which was the discussion about the organized retail theft. That was much better than our previous hearings on that point. And I thought the witness gave very good answers about the gap between what we see in the video and what can be charged. That kind of information could be highly informative to the Assembly Public Safety Committee. So it's just a hope that staff can transmit the learnings on some of the specific things that are in the governor's proposal or in particular legislative approaches, or the origins of Prop 47 versus the increase in threshold amount years before. There's some fact questions beyond data where I think we've dug deeper than the legislative oversight hearing process would permit. And I just want to make sure that's not lost.
Right, good. Commissioner Sidley, followed by Commissioner Aaroner.
So, I do understand and appreciate the urgency of getting information out, and I appreciate the concept of an issue brief. I'm only a little hesitant in this particular area on this study that a lot of the stuff that we've learned, I think that there's been conflicting testimony. And so I'm a little bit concerned about what we are really able to put out as fact. And that doesn't come to the full board for a discussion. Recommendations obviously are even more necessary for a full discussion. But even to the point that Commissioner Byer just made about, you can charge across jurisdiction, or you can charge, it's not a conspiracy that you have to prove the agreement. I think that information is phenomenally important, and it would be great that we put that out as an issue brief. I do think that others will still say that that's not necessarily factually correct. So I just a little bit of a caution to the subcommittee. I don't want to tie your hands, but a little bit of caution that we've heard a lot on all sides here. And so what the actual facts that we can put out without going to the full commission, I think sadly are not quite as robust as we would hope. That's my personal view. If the commission feels differently, I mean, we can put something out, but I've heard a lot on all sides of this complicated issue, and a lot that says we don't know, because as Commissioner Aaroner has pointed out, a lot of data is missing. So I just raised that as a cautionary note. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Aaroner?
Yeah, in response to Commissioner Byer's idea about the fact that there are some pieces that maybe could be shared with staff and all of that, meaning the legislative staff, right, let alone the administration staff, right, or wherever. Ethan, do we have I think it was mentioned that there were 91 people that were listening to our hearing today. Do we know who they are? So do we know that there are legislative staff who have been listening today? Because and that the fact that the hearing everything is taped so that they have access to it. So is that a way we could, share, to say to them, if you weren't listening, you might want to listen to this tape prior to the discussions in the legislature around this, the issue of retail theft?
Yes, Commissioner Aaroner, we capture the contact information for everyone who attends the hearings. That being said, we also have a standard email list that includes every legislative office, including every chief of staff and every legislative director. So we can also reach out that way. So we can easily contact legislative staff. Okay,
because it seems to me that might be a better way to meet without putting such significant pressure on our staff regarding having to do another sort of document for staff. That they should just be aware that there's lots of information out there on our website with 3 different hearings, and that they might want to spend some time listening, preparing for when they are going to be addressing legislation in this area.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cannell.
Yes, first off, Ethan, it's really hard to hear you. I don't know if you've got a problem with your microphone, but I first of all, I want to make sure we use the term spurious as often as possible in whatever report we come up with. That's a pretty neat word there. But I do think the timing, first of all, I think this has been a fascinating study. I came into it with one view of why crime has upticked, and I don't know that I still believe that same thing after all the testimony we've heard. So I think it's been very informational. But I am afraid, though, as the chair said, if we go through the normal process to produce something, it's going to be too late. It's not going to be useful because the legislature is moving so quickly to do something. And I think that something could be benefited from what we've done, because I think it's been a lot of very interesting information. And And although we certainly don't have all the facts, I think we do have some facts, like underreporting, various things like that, that I think would be helpful. So I'll obviously do whatever the commission does, but I think getting something out quickly, I think, as long as it's right, of course, would be very helpful to the legislature.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, Ethan, the direction is to prepare an issue brief. I think concerns about how far we drift to one side or the other clearly going to be dealt with by the vice chair, Camilla. If for some reason somebody thinks I'm going too far to the left, I bet you dollars to donuts Modesto speaks out loud and clear, and we're going to maintain an appropriate tone to what we do on the issue brief.
Very good, Mr. Chairman. So as I understand the direction at the end of this meeting, it is to work on development of an issue brief on this topic, to be followed by a report with commission recommendations, the report obviously to come to the full commission, and we can bring that report to the full commission at the next available meeting when we complete it.
Sounds good to me. So we can conclude our January 25th meeting. And before we go, I just want to wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. We won't see, we're gonna get together before or after, Ethan?
Before, it's February 8th is the next meeting. That should be on your schedules already. That was scheduled at the start of the year. So February 8th, 10 a.m., that will be a business meeting with an agenda obviously to be provided before that meeting. Okay,
so everybody buy yourself a cupcake with a little heart on it, and we'll celebrate Valentine's at the next meeting. Great to see everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Great session today. Great session.